Donald Trump has done it. He's announced far-reaching new tariffs for the whole world, for anyone who does business with America, and is threatening to dismantle the architecture of the entire global economy and to trigger trade wars across the board and to basically change the way the world does business with each other. When making that announcement, Donald Trump said, and I quote, "It's Liberation Day," as he has called it, long awaited. April 2nd will forever be remembered as the day we make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy and good and wealthy. So he said wealthy 3 times. I think that's indicative of what he was thinking about largely. Let's take a look at the, the tariffs that he was talking about, right? So there's a baseline tariff of 10% on any product that comes into the American borders, anything at all, which means that it is irrespective of which country it's coming in, everybody will pay a minimum of 10%, and this comes into effect on the 5th of April. So basically, countries where there isn't too much of a deficit will pay 10%, including United Kingdom, Singapore, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, Argentina, El Salvador, UAE and Saudi Arabia, among others. There's another category of countries that they're calling the worst offenders. White House officials have said that they will impose specific reciprocal tariffs on roughly 60 of the worst offenders, and that will come into effect on the 9th of April. For India, it's about 27%. And I'll explain to you what this basically means. So by worst offenders, they mean that if you are a country that charges American goods very high tariffs while actually doing business with America, when America is charging you very low tariffs, that's unfair and you are an offender, and these are the worst offenders. So European Union will now have to pay 20%, China 54%, including the previous tariffs that were announced, Vietnam, Thailand 46 and 36%, Cambodia 49%, South Africa 30%, Taiwan 32%, and like I said, India is 27%. Now, the baseline rate does not apply to Canada and Mexico because they already have that 25% that was announced earlier because of the border and the fentanyl problems. There's a 25% on all foreign automobiles coming into America. So, for example, South Korea and Germany are going to be really upset about this. Now, there are many countries that have high deficits, which is basically where you import more than you export, but America is at the top of that, and that's probably one of the reasons that Trump wants to correct this whole thing. What is America's trade deficit? $1.1 trillion in 2023. So basically, if the net of what America exported and what it imported was a deficit of 1.1 trillion, it's been more than $1 trillion for 4 straight years. And that's really the problem that Trump is trying to fix. Now, which country is this deficit with largely? China. The US-China deficit is $295 billion in China's favor. The US-Mexico deficit, that's the next one, is $172 billion in Mexico's favor. And Vietnam, they have a deficit of $123. There have been reactions from across the world. Now, here's the thing, right? Before I read out some of those reactions, when Trump first started talking about reciprocal tariffs, the reactions were very sharp and very protectionist. Today, if you see the reactions, they're actually a little more measured. There's not so much threat of countermeasures, but it's more sort of a suggestion of negotiation. For me, it's indicating that there is a lack of appetite here for a trade war and more a sort of an offer for a negotiation. Let me take you to some of the things. So UK's Prime Minister said nobody wins a trade war. It is not in our national interest. We have an economic prosperity deal that's currently in negotiation. That will continue. The German Chancellor has said the recent tariffs are fundamentally wrong and an attack on the trade system. We want cooperation, not confrontation. We will defend our interest. France has said this will lead to immense difficulty for Europe, but it will be a catastrophe for the United States. China has said China firmly opposes this and will take countermeasures to safeguard its own rights. Obviously, reactions have been quite sharp in the stock markets across the world. If we take a look at the stock markets right now, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ fell 3.9% and 4.7% respectively. The American stock market is not pleased. The Asian stock markets have tumbled. The Nikkei fell quite sharply today. So same thing in South Korea, Hong Kong. The US stocks, some of them closed in the green after a very turbulent day, but it has been a difficult day across the market. In India, our Sensex was down about 300 odd points when it opened in the morning. Now, basically, all of the people watching this are not impressed. The Economist specifically, the executive economist of Nomura Research Institute said, and I'm quoting, Trump's tariff carry a risk of destroying global free trade. The United States itself has spearheaded since the Second World War. And there is a view that this could lead to a global recession. Now, Antonio of Fatas of the INSEAD Business School in France has said, I see this as a drift for the US and the global economy towards worse performance, more uncertainty, possibly heading towards something we could call a global recession. Now, Fitch Ratings head of US economic research has said, under the new global levies imposed by Trump, the US tariff rate has jumped, the worst we have seen since 1910. It's a game changer not only for the US economy, for the global economy. Many countries might end up in recession. The IMF managing director has said that she expects a downward correction forecast of global growth across the board. Asia Pacific head of capital economics has said the Asian economies will be hit harder than most others by US reciprocal tariffs. But what is the impact on the American economy? We've talked about this repeatedly in other videos, that fruits, vegetables, cars, electronics, crude oil, sugar, meat, toys, there are fabric, pharmaceuticals will become more expensive across the board in the US, which means that it will drive up inflation, and that is something that the country will have to absorb quite quickly. So, all of the things that I just talked about, apparel, footwear, that's coming in from, mostly from Asia. China is the largest exporter, so, toys, games, sporting goods across the board, electric vehicles, the batteries that go into your phones themselves, all of this is going to become more expensive. Now, how long will it take to become more expensive? It depends on businesses, both in the US and overseas, and how quickly they respond to the tariffs that are being imposed. Some of the products like produce from Mexico, tariffs are expected to rise, to send prices rising more quickly. Some US retailers and other importers may actually absorb some portion of the tariff and reduce their prices in order to compete on the ground. Companies may also use tariffs as an excuse to increase prices, depending on where they are really in their relationship with their customer. Let's take a look at what happens to India specifically. US has announced, it said 26% on the chart that Trump was holding out, but the documents from the White House said 27%. So effectively, we will be paying, anything that goes from India into America that's made in India will have a 27% tariff on it. Now, this is what Trump said about India when he was making that announcement. He said, India, very, very tough. Very, very tough. The Prime Minister has just left. He's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand we charge them almost nothing for years and years and decades. It was only 7 years ago when I came in and we started with China. So goods from India are already facing a 25% tariff on steel, aluminium and auto. So the remaining products will first fall into the 10% tariff starting the 5th of April, and then from the 9th of April fall into the 27% tariff. What was the reaction from the Indian government? Our Minister of State for Finance effectively said, and I'm quoting, for Donald Trump, America is first. For Modi ji, India is first. We will analyze it first, and then we will assess the impact and how to deal with it. Like we said earlier, the US is India's biggest trade partner, and so it's an important relationship with us, and this is something that the Indian government is going to be working really hard on. India's main exports to the US are drug formulations, pharmaceuticals, telecom, precious stones, petroleum products, gold and metal jewelry, ready-made cotton garments, accessories, and iron and steel. We also, our imports are crude, petroleum, coal and coke, electric machinery, aircraft, spacecraft, and other parts. So what's actually going to happen is one expects more negotiation. We know that the Indian government has been negotiating from the beginning of the year to sort of tone this down. We're going to see how much more of that is actually possible. Ankur Sharma, who is a market analyst, has said the announcement of reciprocal tariffs by President Trump on India, Japan and other nations is a significant development. It will have short-term and long-term implications for India's economy. And basically, The other sector that is likely to be hit hard for India is IT. Remember, we export a lot of IT services, and that is something that we're going to be watching really closely to see if we have any sort of swift action on our trade deal and if that actually comes out. So, for people who are watching this closely, what they're saying is effectively we don't know if this is politics or this is policy, which means that is this, is this a Texas standoff? And while America has said, no, we are not negotiating this, this is done, this is announced, this is how the new world order is going to be, is there actually going to be room for these countries to pick up the phone and renegotiate? And over the next couple of weeks, are we going to see a softening of the numbers or the stance for some of these countries? We don't know yet, because there's no sort of precedence for this ever having happened before, and we don't know how that's going to play out. But the American markets is something Donald Trump is going to have to deal with almost immediately, because it will just continue to bleed. The American public, especially the public that's voted for him, is something he's going to have to deal with immediately, because they're going to go to their supermarkets and they're not going to be happy by what they see over the next couple of months. And then, of course, what happens if there is, if some of those countries, like China, for example, decides to actually do a standoff, what will that mean for American jobs and the American population? That's the other thing to look at. So, we don't know if Donald Trump is going to negotiate some more, but the way it stands right now, this seems like it will be disruptive, not just for America, but for the entire world, because everything we have taken for granted about how business is done for the last several decades has changed today. Leave me a comment if you believe that what Donald Trump is doing is good, because remember, his loyalty lies entirely with his country. So is what Donald Trump doing good for America? Do you believe that? If yes or if no, leave me a comment in the comment section.